been waiting for you, Obi-Wan. We meet again at last. The circle is now complete. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
Welcome, Gothamites, to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and now a galaxy far, far away, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Doing very well. It's Friday, and I'm about to start talking about Star Wars. Maybe the very first movie I've ever seen in theaters.
No,
I believe it. I believe
this
it
is the first movie you saw in a movie theater, as opposed to other theaters. In a movie theater,
Yeah.
Was Star Wars: A New Hope.
It was just called Star Wars at the time, and I believe that's the
4.
first time that I ever saw a movie in a theater.
That's so special. This is
yeah.
the first movie you remember seeing in a theater.
It's the first movie I remember seeing in a theater for sure. It's the first. I mean, and I saw it in theaters a lot. I mean, we talked about this. My dad used to take me every year, especially at Christmas time, to our local movie theater that had a connection to their bank, and it was like a kids club. And I never went to any of the other movies. I only went when they played Star Wars. And so yeah, I distinctly remember seeing it in theaters many times as a child.
That's very cool. Now, I saw Star Wars many times as a kid. Every time there was even a minor earthquake in Los Angeles, KTLA would just play Star Wars movies.
Why?
I don't know.
It's like a comforting thing?
No,
You're
I
the
think
psychologist. Tell me, why do you choose Star Wars to play?
If other folks remember this, please write in. And we didn't have an earthquake every month. It was like, every so often. And these were tremors. I'm not talking about the Newhall earthquake that was devastating. These are what I would call non-disruptive, but kind of upsetting earthquakes that would happen once in a while, maybe every 6 months or so. KTLA would shut down programming, and they would just air the Star Wars films, the first 3. I mean, at the time, I'd say it was probably mid 80s to early 90s, and I saw what I would consider like the TV version, broken up with commercials and probably edited down. I would have to say, I don't think I ever saw the gruesome charred bodies of Luke's adoptive parents, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, until much later. I don't remember seeing that until much later. I thought it was a strange George Lucas revision. Like, how do we make this more traumatic or grotesque in later versions? So I definitely saw an edited version of the film for many years.
Did you see the charred bodies of the Jawas? Like, did you see them take the cloaks and throw them onto the fire and all that stuff? Is any of that stuff in there? Or is like Jawas are okay, but Owen and Beru?
I mean, it's a much different image, right? Or imagery, but yeah, I actually think quite a bit was edited down for all the films.
Wow.
Yeah, weird, huh?
I think maybe my local station played it with Owen and Beru, because you can't really see what they are, especially when you're talking about like television. When you're talking about television in the 80s, you can't even really see that there's skeletons. There's
a more distant shot.
Yeah.
And then there's a closer shot.
Oh, okay.
Right. And I think we saw the distant shot. But if anyone
remembers KTLA
around my
in the
generation
mid-80s.
can remember this, oh my gosh. And we would, I can confess this now. We would record it from TV.
Oh yeah, we did that.
Okay. Well, You weren't really supposed to, but we did.
Why not? That's what
I don't
VCRs
know.
were for. Everybody did it. Everybody did it. Now, did you do it with the SLP mode, or did you do it
Good
with
God.
SP mode? Did you
Did
want
it on
good
the
quality?
VCR is
Did,
all I can tell you.
did you want it in good quality, or did you want it in you could fit 3 movies onto one VHS quality? Because
We did it on the half the VHS was home movies and half was Star Wars.
okay, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. We've got a couple things that we want to bring up. For starters, we're hitting Star Wars this episode.
Yeah.
That means that we've only got 6 episodes. We've got this one, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. We've got Force Awakens. We have The Last Jedi, and we have
The Rise of Skywalker.
Rise of Skywalker. And we've got our 200th episode. And after that, we will be done with Star Wars. And we need ideas for what people want to cover next. If you listen to my father, he is dying for us to do The Lord of the Rings.
Wait, the Lord of the Rings or the Rings of Power?
Lord of the Rings, which if you want, now that it's over, could include the Rings of Power,
Sure.
but Lord of the Rings. And since you, Drea, have now taken it upon yourself after having seen Rings of Power to start reading The Silmarillion, which, by the way, everybody, if I needed another event, another life event to affirm that she's the one for me, it's the fact that my wife picked up the Silmarillion on her own.
But let's be clear. I keep falling asleep at the naming of the Ainur.
Yeah, look, you made it through the Aina Lendale, and now we're going into the Valaquenta. You gotta learn the names of the Valar. Folks, if you want to hear more of this, let us know. Let us know in the comments. Because that could be a really good conversation. But we are looking for ideas for things to cover next. And we will definitely put that to a vote. That vote will definitely go to our Patreon members. So for $3, you can vote. But otherwise, let us know on Twitter. Let us know on Facebook. Come right up to us in the middle of a crowd and tell us what you think it should be. Or you could drop us a voice message that we may or may not play on our 200th episode. Drea, why don't you tell the folks where they can leave a voice message for us?
You can go directly to our voice message page. It's speakpipe.com/the Arkham Sessions. Again, speakpipe.com/the Arkham Sessions. It's a 2-minute clip. So send us questions, send us comments, say hello, say what you're working on. A few folks have submitted some messages about what they're working on. We're happy to post that. I'm sure it's somewhat related if you're a listener to our show. And this is another way to tell us your opinion about what we can cover next. And, again, as you said, Brian, we may or may not play it on the show. If you do not want us to play your message on the show because it's personal or because you're sharing something that you just want us to hear, just say that at the beginning of the message and we won't play it. But I think this is a great way to quickly let us know. You just press the button and let us know some of your thoughts and maybe your recommendations for what we can cover next.
Yeah.
By the way, Andor, we haven't abandoned Andor. We are loving the continuation of the show, and we will post additional episodes, but only for our patrons.
Yeah. As said last time, we will handle Andor in 4-episode bits, and everything after that first episode will be covered on our Patreon for our Patreon listeners. Just sign up for the tier that is for right now. We've got it for Batman Begins podcast. That gives you a link to a feed, and you will get all of our thoughts on Andor. And there are many. We're not allowed to say what they are right now. Got to join Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions and join that tier. Okay, so with all of that being said, let's jump into Star Wars, which is very different, I think, than the episodes we've been covering prior to this, because this is the OG. This is the granddaddy of them all. This is the one that got started. This is the one that George Lucas wanted to make, but didn't know if they'd be able to make more. So it's sort of a standalone movie that's certainly left with a little cliffhanger there. You're wondering where Vader went. But it's a big victory for the Rebel Alliance, right? It's also just tonally very different from the rest of the movies. Wouldn't you say?
I look at it through the lens of being one of the first fantasy science fiction adventure movies we've had. And I know others have deeply, thoroughly explored and explained the mythos of Star Wars. So that's not our show. But to put it into context, this was heavily influenced by a number of genres, but put together, like name a few. So the serials, the Buck Rogers, that's one
specifically the Flash Gordon serials. Yeah, he wanted it to feel like the old serials of his youth, specifically like Flash Gordon. He also was a huge Akira Kurosawa fan.
So you have some of that traditional historical samurai inspired fighting. You have King Arthur as another influence, and Hero's Journey, the original Joseph Campbell paradigm or framework as a part of this,
right?
And a little bit of Space Odyssey, a little bit of more what I would consider, at least at the time, the 60s and 70s, as recognizable epic science fiction storytelling, the ships, the vast space, everything. But this is so different, put together. What is the result of all of those influences and all of the storytelling, the mythos, the heavy adventure-ness of Star Wars? It's so unique to anything we've ever seen before. It really is just this giant fun adventure with a deep, serious drama to it. Like, there are serious things that happen in this film, but the tone, the music, the atmosphere, everything sort of becomes larger than life.
Well, and let's make something clear for people who maybe grew up after Star Wars was already a thing. Up until this time, science fiction movies traditionally didn't do well. This was a huge gamble for Lucas. It was a huge gamble for 20th Century Fox. This was at a time where most people understood science fiction epics, space operas, if you will, to be cheap and really just cheesy looking films where you would have a spaceship on a rod or on strings. They had not yet figured out good, believable ways to make these things interesting. You go back to 1968 and 2001, A Space Odyssey, expertly directed by Stanley Kubrick. This had a lot of influence on how these sorts of things would be done in Star Wars. However, you look at that movie and it's a very clean movie. These spaceships are very pure white. They're very clean, very, it's not dirty. It's not lived in. And that's what George Lucas wanted. He wanted the feeling of American graffiti in space. He wanted hot rods. He wanted spaceships that could be hot rodded up. You know, the Millennium Falcon famously is a ship that, yes, was a Carillion freighter, but had a lot of modifications done to it by its owners. And that's the exact same thing. If you watch American Graffiti, it's all about whose car has been modded the best and which one is not. And I think it's interesting. The Empire is meant to be, everything is meant to be clean and straight off the assembly line, whereas the X-Wings, the Millennium Falcon, the Alliance ships are the ones that are meant to look like these folks have gone and found these ships and done things to them to make them better and cooler. And so that's the aesthetic that George Lucas was going for. No one had ever seen anything like this until May 25th, 1977, when this movie hit theaters. What
do you think, since we are a show about psychology, given that you were a kid that saw this in the theater, and who knows what I was watching at this point as they aired it on TV, all edited down, what do you think that impact was for audiences seeing this universe, the foundations of this universe really kind of looking like this, looking lived in, looking almost familiar to them in a way?
Yeah.
Like, no one watches A Space Odyssey aside from me and is like, oh, I'm completely
immersed in this world.
Right? Like, I've escaped my own the boundaries of the frontiers of my experience right now, and I'm fully engrossed in this story.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he did want it to make it relatable. I don't think that there is any coincidence that he chose a very simple to tell story, a fairy tale, if you will. You have your fairy tale archetypes, right? You've got your farm boy who is destined for bigger and better things. You mentioned King Arthur. You've got young Arthur. You have your wizard. You have your space pirate. You have your damsel in distress being held in a castle by a dark wizard as well. You have an evil kingdom, and then you've got a band of roguish allies who are all trying to bring that kingdom down. It's a fairy tale, and there's no hiding that. And I think that's why for a long time, when people said, oh, you're going to do the psychology of Star Wars, isn't that a little too easy? I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about, right? I think that's what they were thinking about. They were thinking about Star Wars. And if you were to leave it at this one movie, sure, I think it's a little simple. But I also think there's a lot to talk about when you talk about some of these characters. While they may be archetypes, they are still well-written characters. Better written maybe than any of the characters that have come since then.
Mm-hmm. Well, my fascination about the psychology of Star Wars is how the characters interrelate. I completely agree that they are representing this, so-called monomyth, this hero's journey framework where we're laser focused on someone like Luke Skywalker, the protagonist, who's going to go through the phases of separation, initiation to this amazing journey, and then return home. So this full arc, even in this first movie, because one can argue that his so-called hero's journey is episodes 3, 4, and 5, which I think can be managed, but it's also pretty limited to the first film, where he makes a full. He has it's a chapter of his life that could easily be mapped onto the hero's journey. But my interest here, as I was trying to get to without interrupting my own self, was the relationships that Luke has with others. I'll loosely call them friendships, though we know there's a mentorship, there's a kind of a romance, there's a companionship with the droids, there's the collegial relationship with Han. There are these relationships that he begins to develop, and that for me is the interesting meat of this sandwich. That's where, yes, it's the paradigm of the hero's journey, but I'm really curious about how this story tells us about the benefits and sometimes the challenges of human relationships. And by the way, when I say human, I still mean the droids, because I think they're represented here.
They apply.
Oh, they totally apply. and how those, even without Luke, how they relate to one another, hold their limits, are challenged with boundaries, experience loss, experience their own unmet needs, and how they can come into conflict with one another, and how that teaches us, at least from my perspective, and what I felt, how I felt I greatly benefited from Star Wars, was what it means to be a friend and what it means to have a friend.
So you're not even talking about the family, the concept of the family within Star Wars. You're talking about the droids. We first see the two friends, the best friends, R2 and 3PO. And then this is further progressed as the movie goes forward, where you can see Chewbacca and Han, Luke and Obi-Wan,
and how
Han and Luke,
and by the way, the relationship that Luke had with his adoptive caregivers then gets transferred to his new mentor, the Merlin figure,
and
Obi-Wan.
the friendship that he had prior to the movie even beginning with Biggs, as he left home, you've got a best friend character who left to go to the academy and left Luke there to endure another season of moisture farming. By the way, that is a brilliant thing. I don't think enough people appreciate the imagination it takes to say Luke Skywalker is on a desolate desert planet, right? This is a planet that basically requires its inhabitants to die, right? There's really nothing good about this place, and yet the farms, they're farming moisture. I mean,
it makes sense.
It makes total sense, but no one would think of it. They'd think, oh, farm. I'm going to make a farm boy. I'm going to put some grass. I'm going to put some fields. Like, no, this is a desolate place. Well, what are you growing? Water? I guess we're growing water. Okay. I think it's a brilliant piece of imagination there. You keep mentioning the hero's journey and Joseph Campbell. For folks who are not aware of Joseph Campbell, we're talking about really his book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, which was first published in 1949. And it basically is an analysis of mythological narratives and how much of them are using the same formulas to tell stories about these characters. And he's by no stretch of the imagination the very first person to study these characters, but he is the one who has decidedly written the book that has really mapped out what that hero's journey is for people. And there are 17 stages of the hero's journey. We're going to talk about those stages as we go forward, because I think there probably isn't a better example that I can think of than the original Star Wars movie for the perfect class on Joseph Campbell's monomyth, the hero's journey. Right. So these can all be broken down into 3 acts: your departure, your initiation, and your return. Drea, you have mentioned much of this already just in your talk about Star Wars. And by the way, there are entire college courses about this, and they use Star Wars to map out this journey. And there's no secret that George Lucas was specifically influenced by this and decided to use this as his basis, his foundation for writing the script to Star Wars. Now that we have all of that in mind, let's talk a little bit about these characters. I would say that your hero in this film, this is going to be Luke Skywalker, right? Your farm boy.
Right. And he is, as Joseph Campbell would describe, suffering from a symbolic deficiency. I would probably say something like he has a search for purpose. He's looking for his meaning in this universe. He has a quest for significance. Many of us have this. Some people have a deep, like a passionate level, an intense level of a quest for significance. And it leads them to do a number of things, leave their hometown, even take risks, do things that they may not normally do, betray others. I mean, it's not always good, but in the framework of what's considered the hero, that's kind of the starting point, is this figure is lacking something, or something is taken from him. So it's this push to something bigger.
Yeah. So one of the key elements, as you're describing that, is in Joseph Campbell's work, is this idea of the ordinary world, right? Tatooine, in this case, is the ordinary world. It's the mundane. It's the thing that that Luke ultimately, when he's looking at the twin suns off in the distance, he's desperately trying to...
He's like, this is not enough for me.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
He's so disappointed. I mean, we meet him and we can't really blame him for this. He feels invisible. He feels disappointed in himself. There's more out there. And he knows there's more out there because his best friend has just left, as you said, to put his fantasies into a reality.
Yeah. And
this kid is like, all I get to do is get the power converters.
Yeah.
It seems to him already a life of disappointment.
Well, and let's talk for a second about how desperate someone is to leave the ordinary world. I realized that in various versions of the script, and I realized that there are deleted scenes that explain a little more about this and about Biggs, his best friend who left. But let's be clear, in the edited version that we were handed, Luke wants to leave and join the academy. This is not a rebel academy. He wants to go join the Empire.
It's unclear to me because his friend ends up being a rebel pilot.
Correct. And there is a deleted scene where Biggs comes home and is talking to him at the local hangout and all that stuff, where he's basically saying, oh yeah, there are big things happening. You got to come join us. You got to do this. But like I said, in the edited version of the movie, all he wants to do is join the academy.
Yeah.
And so it's really one place.
It's almost like, okay, especially now that we've seen Andor, it's almost as if this planet has yet to really be touched by either the rebels or the Imperials. Like, they know that these things are out there. It's almost as if there's this vagueness about the big war,
at least in the area that Luke hangs out in most, right? Which is probably
the farm, and then the little market where he goes to get droids,
right? But and whatever Tashi, wherever Tashi Station is. But
I mean, Tashi Station is just a junkyard.
Sure, but I will say this. For as poor a farm boy as Luke Skywalker appears to be, I also think there's significant privilege in that character. Like, Uncle Owen he's got the credits to buy droids. And let's be honest, these are stolen droids, picked up by the Jawas and sold to him secondhand. But he's got the money to do it.
That's so interesting. So you see this family as a privileged family?
I see them, well, and here's why. Because when they end up going to Mos Eisley, this is clearly a part of town he's never been in. Obi-Wan Kenobi explains to him that you will never find a collection of more wretched scum and villainy.
Okay.
And so he's taken him to the big city where this is... There are Imperials. We see that there are stormtroopers patrolling the area. It's a bunch of criminals and thieves. Like, I wouldn't call Luke Skywalker as living on the wrong side of the tracks. Would you? Like,
well, I'm not. No, and I think that we're sort of getting privileged, intertwined with other lifestyles, because I see this family as sort of being in a remote area and
but he's not struggling. He's struggling with boredom.
No,
but
I
you know,
think,
the family is not struggling.
Sure. They have their own farm, but there's almost this like, what's the word I'm looking for? Just sort of a country dwelling, simple set of folks who, and I don't mean simple. I mean sort of like simple life that that is set apart from the riches, the elegance, the Coruscant. Like, this is so different.
Well, I'm not saying that there aren't degrees of privilege. I'm simply saying he is not being raised in a
there's sand on the floor. No, and again, I don't mean that
the entire floor is sand.
No, I don't mean that like that means they're not privileged. I just mean compared to other parts of the universe that we already know exist.
Sure, but I'm talking about here. I'm talking about on Tatooine, right? He is not being raised in hardship. He is not, except for the oppressive thumb of his uncle, who we think is being oppressive, but really when it comes down to it, the family history is, my job is to keep this kid safe. So if I've got to lie to him about the harvest needing one more person, it's to keep my son, my adopted son, my charge here, rather than going out traipsing across the galaxy like his father, who, spoiler alert, will end up not being a good dude.
Yeah.
Like, this is that's really the motivation for his father, and keeping them in such a remote place, and moisture farming or whatever. But I think that there's a strong possibility that I mean, okay, since we're allowed to talk about the prequels, because that has led to this point, Owen's father had the money to buy Shmi off of Watto, right? Like, and I imagine that Owen and Beru are living off of money inherited. Like, I think they come from some amount of money. Like, they are not poor schlubs who are just living out, like an episode of Alone. They're not building their home there. I think these are people who have chosen this lifestyle because of its simplicity, but also specifically to protect Luke.
Right. So there's a shelteredness about this lifestyle.
Yeah.
There's the choice to be in a remote place and have all that land and have your own farm and be pretty independent.
Yeah.
Is a way privileged. Your ability to stay out of the slums, not even have to ever go into that part of town for whatever nefarious thing you have to do because you're forced to.
Yeah.
All of that I get. I think my problem is that I'm looking at the bigger universe and knowing what other lifestyles exist.
Sure.
And I think, who knows what the main point of creating, designing Luke, the way that George Lucas designed him was, but I'd say that what comes across to me is a longingness that this isn't enough, that this is insufficient, there's a lacking, and there has to be some semblance of scarcity to feel that.
Yeah.
I mean, what an interesting story if this were in Coruscant and he was in what if, this is a big what if, but what if he and Leia were sent, of course, she was sent to be a princess.
Well, and
he was sent to be this farm kid.
And by the way, that's not, you're not wrong. That you are absolutely right. I think there are degrees.
Why didn't they send him to, well, I know why, but he could have been in a wealthy senator's family in Coruscant. Because when they meet, I think there's a little bit of, there's like a judgment that she makes of him she kind of
Well,
makes
she
it,
first says he's short.
yeah, she kind of makes it to everybody, but the judgment is like, you do not know what you're getting into. You are not experienced. You have not seen the world.
And he's not.
And
he
he's not.
hasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, she has done nothing but see the world. Honestly, we're talking about like characters like Andor. We're talking about, there's the Solo movie. The Obi-Wan Kenobi TV series does follow Leia for a period of time. But to be honest, the character I want more of is Leia.
Yeah.
Because Leia is the person who has been raised by a senator, has been raised to be a politician, but at the same time has been raised specifically with this fight in her to, Andor talks about having been in this fight since he was 6, but Leia has literally been surrounded, engulfed by the politics and the sort of dual nature of her father's work. And I think that is a far more interesting character to me, because by the time we meet her in the later on in the movie, because we do meet her in the beginning, she quickly gives R2-D2 some plans and then is knocked out and taken as the damsel in distress. They play the message back. Obi-Wan explains the call to adventure. Luke says, I can't do that. I can't leave my uncle and my aunt. I've got to...
Yeah, and in fairness, he's given a lot of information. He's kind of whining for a little bit and then discovers like 10 billion things at once. So it's like, wait, who's this lady? What are these droids telling us? Who's this old man? What is the Force? My father? Like, all of this information is flooding him.
Sure.
And so I think the natural reaction is to be wary and cautious and to kind of sink back in, crouch into your own familiar experience, which is to say, I don't think I can be a part of this. This is just outside of my understanding.
Exactly. That's the thing, is he doesn't have that experience. He doesn't have that confidence. He knows he wants to go out into the universe, the bigger universe, and do something, but he's not expecting to be thrust into it immediately, just simply because an old man handed him a laser sword.
I do like that scene where Obi-Wan is explaining the Force. He explains that he fought alongside Luke's father. Of course, that this is the introduction of the shadow. If you're following along with the Joseph Campbell
We don't
mythology
know
here.
He's the shadow.
Well,
I
this
mean,
is the introduction of the shadow figure. Like, oh wait, there's more here. There's an antagonist. There's a character who, at this point in time, we believe has murdered Luke's father.
Well, and he just murdered a whole bunch of people on a ship as well, because technically we are introduced to the shadow, Darth Vader, first. He comes on board the cruiser and threatens Leia and strangles a dude who probably could have told him what he wanted to know, but he decides to make an example of him.
And it's no coincidence that Campbell named the shadow the dark side, that it represents all things dark side. Villains, enemies, antagonists, characters who may not even know that they're villains, but create a significant conflict for our characters here.
Sure.
But that scene is really interesting to watch again. There's a pacing to that scene that's kind of interesting, where Luke and Obi-Wan are just talking about this history, and there are strange pauses. It's almost as if it's giving you a moment to fill in the gaps with everything that you know now. It's an interesting watch back. And later I learned that scene was actually edited differently in how it was filmed. It was filmed in a certain sequence and then edited in a completely different way. So the lines are not really, they don't really flow as well as they could have. But the end result is fascinating because there are these longer pauses and like weird expressions, and kind of like even the the gestures and the positions that the two of them are in. Is like, what is there something else happening in the room? You kind of get the sense of like, there's something else happening here. There's something else they're talking about.
Yeah.
And the reality is that's true. There are other things that are happening that we don't yet know, that Luke doesn't yet know. And it kind of makes it more entertaining to watch.
And by the way, you talk about the editing and the pacing of it. It's famously been accounted that Marcia Lucas, George's wife, who was the editor of this film, saved the movie in many respects. Like, she came in and made a lot of changes to things, to rough cuts, and she came in and sort of exerted her expertise. And everyone that then saw it after she touched it said, oh, this is a much better film than it could have been. And so people have to thank her for things exactly like you're talking about. This idea of this scene having not been presented exactly the way that it was written and filmed. And that's someone going in and going, this could be much more interesting if it's like this. And so yeah, it's an interesting tidbit, Drea. But in that scene, we're meeting our mentor, right? So technically Luke has met his mentor, but arguably he becomes the mentor, because in that moment, that's when he rejects the call to adventure. Arguably, Obi-Wan sort of becomes the mentor the moment that Luke sees those charred bodies and says, there's nothing left for me here.
It's so interesting because prior to that moment, I actually do struggle with this. I really didn't understand what Luke was longing for. So it could be a gender thing, because when I saw this as a young person, I really liked Leia. And I just loved Leia's take charge attitude and her confidence and her own self foregrounding. She doesn't become a back character or a backgrounded character. There is almost a willful, confident presence. And as a young kid, you like that kind of attitude, especially if you're a young kid. So the irony is weird. Like, I'm a young kid. I don't know what I want to do in life. I don't really see my future out there. I'm sort of the Luke. And it's not Luke who I care about. It's Leia who I turn to and think, okay, I'm fascinated with her. I want more of her story. Luke, on the other hand, what is the deal? What is the and I don't mean that. I don't mean that like, what's wrong with him?
Who cares about this kid?
I just mean, okay, I get it that you're longing for something, that you're disillusioned with your life.
But who isn't?
Well, I mean, I guess I want more specificity on like, and I think that the trauma of losing his aunt and uncle serve as a almost a catapult into, now I know that there's an enemy out there, and I'm committed to challenging the enemy, to having at least some opportunity, some chance to fight it. And that, I think, becomes, then I'm a little bit more I'm a little bit more understanding of what I think what I'm saying is, I had wished that I understood him more before that happened.
It's so funny because I don't, I'm like you were then, or I have never liked Luke. And this
ever, like even as a kid,
this goes correct. As a child, I would fight the next door neighbor to play Han Solo because no one wanted to be Luke.
I don't think you're alone in that. I mean,
well, but no one wanted to be Luke, and it's not just because of the piracy of Han Solo, the scoundrelness. It's my complete lack of relatability to this character who I don't think it's an accident, if you're talking about sort of the psychology of color being used to invoke certain things. This kid's wearing a pure white outfit, like top of his outfit, this tunic is white. He's a blonde kid. He's blue eyes, or whatever. He's just not a kid that I can relate to. And I'm not saying I could relate to the scoundrel that was Han Solo, but to me, I always saw this sort of whiny, and I will again say, because this is what I sort of thought as a kid.
Yeah, you thought he was privileged.
I thought he was a whiny, privileged brat who didn't want to stay home because it was boring. And, I never ever associated with Luke Skywalker, even after he destroys and again, this is something that we were talking about a little bit when we talked about Andor, right? You've got a character who has been born into a destiny. Like the only reason this kid is amazing at everything is because he was born into it. And you don't know that until later. But it's clear that, this kid didn't work hard for anything. You see him training once.
You're talking about Luke.
Luke. There's one scene where he's training in Star Wars, and he's not especially good at it. It's when he's...
Are you talking about training with Obi-Wan?
Yeah, the lightsaber on the Millennium Falcon, when he's going up against the little droid, the little ball droid, and he's learning to reach out with his feelings and to whatever. And then at the end of the movie, he's the only one able to blast the the thing, because he has reached out with his that after that one training. And the kid and he comes right out and says, oh well, that's basically the size of the womp rats that I'm sitting there bullseyeing.
Why are you
which,
killing
by the way,
womp rats?
Yeah, by the way, is torture. Like I never liked this kid. This kid is just,
he just admitted to abusing animals.
Oh yeah, as me and my friends would drive along in our little cruisers, I would just shoot rodents simply for having existed. But you realize that this is all part of the Force, right? He's not just a good shot. He is a good shot and an excellent pilot because his father was an excellent pilot and a good shot. And by the way, that's also because he is, the most Force driven kid any person has ever seen. So yeah, this whole idea of being born into destiny is not my bag. So I never liked Luke Skywalker.
So you're saying somebody who is born into somebody who has a legacy in the form of natural abilities. The Force, you can argue, is a talent or a set of natural abilities.
Now you're going into the George Lucas argument of the midichlorians.
Sure. It doesn't even have to be the midichlorians, but the sense that if your father, like your father before you have an inclination, you're a Force wielder. Yeah. And this is not completely outside of the mythos of Star Wars, of any Star Wars, that some people have a higher level of ability. They have more opportunity. They're in their repertoire to use the Force in an intense way, in a close way, in a harmonious way.
Yes.
This is why the Force is dangerous, because if you're a Sith, you could be very powerful. And you have Luke. So going back to my point, I'm sort of chuckling to myself because in a way we are given the story of Luke and we don't like him until he's actually striving for something, until he realizes that he can do better, he can be better. Mm-hmm. And maybe that is the point, that had we seen him struggling in the farm, had we seen him out in the fields crying and hurting and being hit by the sun and having a tormented life, we might think differently, because what we see is this terror, this like privileged terror-filled kid who wants more, and we're like, but do you deserve more? Like what compassion do we see from him?
Correct.
What humanity do we see from him?
100%.
And up till now, we see so much more humanity in 3PO, in R2, in then Leia, and even in Han Solo, you see some characterological things that kind of make you root for him. Mm-hmm. So there's something maybe what's lacking, because I said, I don't really know what's lacking in him that makes me want to root for him, but maybe what's lacking in Luke is characterological. Like we really he needs to earn us.
Well, and maybe that's all by design. Because like you said,
sure,
that the most he suffered is his dad makes him go grease up 3PO, give him a bath. I don't want to.
Let's talk about the droids a little bit in the little time we have left, because we do have 3 films in this trilogy to talk more and more about the hero's journey and about some new characters, especially with Han and Leia becoming more prominent in the second film. But the droids I find interesting because we spend a lot of time with them. I don't know if it's Marcia Lucas's design, but we are introduced to the droids very early on. The first line of the film is 3PO and his panic. He is undergoing complete
he's being
fear.
3PO.
Yeah, I mean, the ship is being attacked, and I think that's kind of the setting for this story is, and I think the history more than I do, that these are droids, but they're meant to be our storytellers. These 2 buddies who we immediately recognize as having some kind of relationship, who don't always have the same goals, who bicker, who go in different ways, who see the world very differently, but yet are a set, that they are together and we are to be on this journey with them as they are together.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So R2 and 3PO are, as Joseph Campbell would call, the herald in this story.
Yeah. So the herald is typically a figure, a person, but could be an item. So this is the character that issues challenges or announces coming change. They basically move the story forward. Heralds serve to motivate the hero into action. So I guess, R2 is significantly moving the story forward with holding the hologram of Leia and literally moving that file across the desert to find Luke.
And 3PO is doing the same thing. He is often the herald in that because he speaks English, is able to tell us the odds of success or failure, or we should not do this, or are you crazy? You're going to do that. He is narrating that for us.
I think 3PO, for many of us, especially young kids watching this, some people, I understand, some people are aggravated or annoyed by 3PO because of their 3PO's expressions and panic and sometimes irrational sensibility. But I think that 3PO can be a character that gives us signals, especially those of us who need some cues around the intensity of the situation, the emotion of the situation, the level of sort of the reaction that we might have.
Yeah.
I admit that 3PO tends to be on a 9 or 10 when maybe the situation calls for a 5 or 6.
But you're right. 3PO think about what his job is. He's, as a protocol droid, part of his job is to translate for us. He is literally translating the circumstances.
I love
each and every time.
He's sort of he although it may not be his exact goal, because I think he's designed for certain things. The fact that he expresses his emotional reactions gives us this additional context. And so he's giving us these cues and telling us what we need to know about the situation.
And by the way, I find myself wondering if we as audience members have been manipulated to find him annoying because the other characters in the scenes find him annoying. Would we care as much if they didn't roll their eyes at him, or if they didn't, say, shut up, goldenrod, or would someone turn him off, whatever. Like if there wasn't that reaction, I wonder if we would be as annoyed, because he is giving us very valuable information that in that moment, these characters don't want to hear. But we as audience members need to know what's going on. And I think you're right. I think they're 100% the herald in this story. This is actually going to be a much longer episode than you and I think maybe anticipated, because we're going through the hero's journey almost step by step. So I actually propose that we end it right here as our hero is actually crossing the threshold. And by that, I mean going into Mos Eisley. He's about to meet some very important characters who I would say are going to be your loyal retainers. We'll talk about who those people are. I think you know who we're going to meet.
Is that the guy with the butt face?
Yes.
In the bar?
Yes, I think that guy. But I think that it would actually be a really good idea to split this up into maybe 2 episodes. And this has been a really good opportunity for us to focus squarely on Luke. But I think from this moment forward, we're going to start getting into a lot more of Han, Chewbacca, Obi-Wan even, and certainly Leia. And I'm excited about that. What do you think, Dre?
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I definitely want to continue to explore the interrelationships, which is kind of my wheelhouse here, in that, sure, I love Star Wars, and there's awesome things about Star Wars that we know now, like Peter Cushing wasn't wearing pants when he filmed half of his scenes. Oh no, he wasn't wearing boots.
He wasn't.
He wasn't wearing boots.
Wearing pants.
He was wearing pants and
he was wearing
sandals
no,
or
he was slippers.
So there's these cool things that we learn, but what can we learn about the interrelationships and the psychological pieces of this storytelling that maybe we can humbly add to the narrative here? So happy to have a second chance at this.
All right, so stay tuned for an unexpected episode 2 covering Star Wars. Until then, we want to thank some of our patrons who made this possible: Antonio Lopez, Todd Stashwick, Hero's Journey Fitness. Coincidence? I think not. Scott the Therapist, Frank Moeller, my best friend, Mark Pepper, Candy B, Emily Higgins, wonderful podcaster in her own right. Go check out Tasteless with Emily Higgins, Swara Salih, Michael Pruitt, Mike Blanchard, John Henry. Thank you all for your contributions. Come join us over at patreon.com/the Arkham Sessions to get your name called out in a future episode. Until then, Drea, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you online?
You can find a lot of stuff on my website, drdreapsychology.com, or just chat with me on socials at Arkham Asylum Doc.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at bward028, on Instagram at b_ward028. You can find us both on Twitter at Arkham Sessions or on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. Come follow us on Facebook. Email us at arkhamsessions@gmail.com. Be sure to follow our family over at Fanbase Press. And until next time,
let us know. Luke Skywalker, privileged?
Yes. I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
Who's the more foolish, the fool or the fool who follows him?